This video is based on chapter 9 of my new book, Godmindfamily, The Human Mind, Behaviour, Symptoms, the Family, Society, Politics, and God's Kingdom Explained. It's available free on my website, robertensor.com, spelled E-N-S-O-R, and to buy from Amazon in ebook and paperback formats via the links in the description below. So I've rolled media, social media, and the internet into one video because most of the media is online nowadays, and the majority of the mainstream media, at least in the US and UK, is renowned for its left-wing bias. For example, a 2017 Pew Research Center analysis found that coverage of Trump's first 100 days was mostly negative in the press from January 21st to April 2017. 62% of stories about the Trump administration were negative, while only 20% of news stories about Obama were negative following his 2009 inauguration. The media in the US and UK is dominated by a small number of billionaires, corporate conglomerates, and tech giants, and is consumed largely via search and social media platforms. Are we supposed to believe that these extremely rich individuals and corporations do not have editorial agendas that support their interests? Any news outlet has to choose which stories and issues to cover and which to ignore due to space and time constraints, and this creates room for selection bias before we even get into narrative bias, which is how the organization chooses to portray the events covered. Consequently, by far the most important issue for humanity, salvation through Jesus Christ, has received scant attention in the mainstream media, which has chosen instead to focus on various scandals in the church and its religious reportage. In their 1988 book, Manufacturing Consent, The Political Economy of the Mass Media, Edward S. Herman and Noam Chomsky proposed that consent in a democracy is manufactured via 5 mechanisms. Number one, the media are large corporations owned by even larger conglomerates who are going to use their investment to represent their interests. Number two, the media need advertising for revenue, especially in the internet age, and must cover the news in a way that does not alienate advertisers, who are themselves companies, often large ones. Number three, the media rely on expert opinions from scientists, politicians, civil servants, military leaders, and other experts for their content and commentary. But these individuals are often financed by elites and were given their positions largely to represent the interests of the corporate, political, and academic establishments. Number four, flack. Media outlets that deviate from the interests of corporations can receive a negative response in the form of campaigns, legal threats, and criticism from other outlets designed to make an example out of news organizations that don't toe the line. Number five, fear ideology. The population is rallied against a perceived enemy they are taught to fear and hate. Traditionally, this was communism back in the Cold War. Enemies and wars on various things have multiplied in recent decades, which has certainly kept the media busy. And Noam Chomsky wrote that entertainment media is used to distract the populace from important issues and is used to convey elite ideologies and reinforce social norms. This has become increasingly obvious in recent decades with the excessive use of Mary Sues and the prevalence of anti-white, anti-men, and anti-Christian agendas in films, television, and contemporary published books becoming increasingly obvious and tiresome. This is especially implausible and jarring when it comes to historical fiction, TV shows, games, and films which are littered with inaccuracies. Moreover, entertainment media has become incredibly dreary in the last 15 years, especially with an overabundance of dysfunctional, traumatized characters, providing messed up role models for children and adults. Even the basics of TV and film production, like sound recording, are increasingly bad, with movies and TV shows becoming quite hard to hear due to mumbling and poor audio quality. Comedy is basically dead at this point, killed by ideology. Chomsky observed that the biases of the media are so subtle and deeply ingrained that many reporters don't even realize they are biases. A fish doesn't realize it's surrounded by water, it just takes the water for granted. The creep of politically correct ideology into all forms of media has happened gradually enough that some people have barely noticed how dramatically things have changed in a relatively short time frame, like the frog in the proverbial pan of boiling water. But when you rewatch movies from 20 or 30 years ago, it becomes very obvious. The title Manufacturing Consent was inspired by Walter Lippmann's usage in his 1922 book Public Opinion. Edward Bernays also wrote a book in 1928 called Propaganda, in which he argued that it was necessary for an orderly democracy that consent should be engineered and the masses manipulated. The term propaganda has since gained negative connotations, motivating the pivot to words like public relations. Bernays believed these efforts should not be confined to wartime propaganda, but should be proactive to promote the interests of the society and the economy and guide the public through a chaotic world full of information they cannot digest on their own. He recommended using tricks of the trade from advertising and public relations in the consent engineering process. Bernays was not some crank conspiracy theorist. He worked with many large corporations such as General Electric, Lucky Strike, and United Fruit Company, and was known as the father of public relations. Ever since the 2000s and the diffusion of the internet disrupting their print-based business model, the media has been pressured into running clickbait videos and articles to survive. And what articles and videos are people most likely to click on? The ones that scandalize, polarize, panic, depress, titillate, and irritate, because many minds tend to focus on the negative and are driven by and addicted to negative emotions. This is because of broken human nature following the fall. And so we end up with news feeds filled with irresponsible doomsaying, panic mongering about health, the environment, crime, the economy, etc. Due to the power of the mind over the physical world, extreme panic mongering reportage actually makes some of these problems worse. In yet another instance of the self-fulfilling prophecy, the internet has amplified humanity's tendency for self-destruction. This is especially obvious when it comes to fear-inducing coverage of health-related news, typically centering around some dire warning about the health risks of this, that, or the other, and spurious correlations found in empirical studies. There is empirical evidence showing that excessive consumption of the news can lead to anxiety, depression, and physical symptoms. There is also strong evidence showing a link between excess social media use, psychiatric symptoms, and somatic symptoms. From 2000 to 2020, the prevalence of chronic disease rose in America by 7 or 8 million people every 5 years. This is the time period in which people really started using the internet and social media. One of the main drivers of this phenomenon is people searching their symptoms online in an effort to relieve health-related anxiety. But of course, the result is that it typically fuels their anxiety. There is a strong correlation between people obsessively Googling their symptoms and negative health outcomes, a phenomenon known as cyberchondria. This frequently leads to misdiagnosis, unnecessary medical procedures, and worst of all, nocebo effects. Worrying about health makes health worse. Digital technology has proven to be an incredibly effective vehicle for nocebo effect. The most egregious example of panic-inducing health news in living memory was the coverage of the COVID-19 pandemic. In days gone by, the government and media withheld information or downplayed concerning events because they didn't want to create a panic. That approach well and truly went out of the window during the pandemic, with some exceptions that were mostly outside of the mainstream media. Daily death counts were blared at the population from various devices in a sickening display of alarmism. If the media kept a running total of deaths resulting from car accidents, they'd have a population too scared to get in the car and drive anywhere, since auto-related deaths far exceeded COVID-related mortality, which primarily affected those with comorbidities. Headline after headline focused on the dangers of the virus and deaths supposedly resulting from the virus, with no regard for the potential mental and physical health effects of all that fear-inducing coverage in a populace that had little else to do but watch the news, because they were subject to lockdowns and furloughing, huge and unprecedented mistakes with untold economic ramifications that we are still feeling to this day in the form of ballooning national debts. The immune system determines whether a pathogen produces symptoms or not, and the immune system is controlled by the autonomic nervous system itself, directed by the brain and the mind. And we know from the success stories of people who have healed from long COVID via mind-body techniques that long COVID is a mind-body illness largely caused by fear. How many were literally scared to death by the alarmist coverage of the pandemic? Many people never recovered from the collective trauma of the pandemic and still live in fear to this day. Likewise, focus on social divisions has increased dramatically since we entered the information age and has actually exacerbated the polarization of society, especially in the USA. The nocebo effect, or negative self-fulfilling prophecy effect, extends way beyond health. Covering society negatively in the news makes society worse because perception creates reality due to the superiority of mind over matter. For example, there is solid evidence indicating that sensationalist and detailed media coverage of mass shootings, other violent crimes, and suicides exerts an influence on others to imitate those acts. This is called the copycat effect, or the media contagion effect, and is a well-recognized phenomenon. Research has shown that within 13 days of a mass shooting, the odds of another mass shooting rise significantly. That is why certain media outlets and journalists restrict the details shared surrounding certain violent crimes and try to focus on the victims. The incidence of mass shootings in the USA has increased drastically since the 1960s, and especially the year 2000, and serial murder was rare before the Second World War, but increased significantly from 1960 to the 1980s. These violent outbursts are symptoms of a society with declining self-differentiation, fueled by sensationalist media coverage that makes celebrities out of monsters and the internet's role as a petri dish for mind viruses. The big lie theory, postulated by Adolf Hitler, holds that the bigger the lie, the better the chance that people will believe it, because though the average person is capable of relatively small lies or minor distortions of the truth, they do not generally tell huge lies and do not expect anyone else to either. This theory has been used successfully, including by the Nazis, but it is nonetheless flawed and evil. Fantastic lies and even extraordinary truths are often disbelieved precisely because people think they sound ridiculous, especially in our era of widespread disinformation, where the public have become far more jaded and less trusting than they were in the 1920s, a result of all the lies they've been exposed to and personally engaged in during the course of the last century. Another related theory of lying holds that the more an idea is repeated, especially by confident authority figures, the more people will believe it. That is why most people believe what they believe. We cannot simply blame it all on the news and social media, however, because exposure to them does not need to make people sick, depressed, or anxious. If they don't believe the negative, panicky content they encounter on those platforms, and if they really can't moderate the use of the internet, social media, and devices, people can always unplug, delete their social media accounts, and trade in their smartphones, although with the rise of online banking, this is becoming increasingly hard to do. Government regulation of social media, while justifiable to a limited extent, is not really a solution to these problems, because the lack of self-differentiation that has made, basically self-discipline, that has made many people addicted to social media will find another potentially even more dangerous outlet if those platforms are banned or restricted. If they're not addicted to social media, they may be addicted to gaming, drugs, or pornography, or suffer from some other dysfunction unless they possess or develop sufficient emotional discipline to control themselves. It's really the responsibility of the parents who buy the devices and pay for the internet to determine what children are exposed to online, not the state. Just because there are some bad actors in the tech sector doesn't mean people are just helpless victims who have no choice but to fall right into the trap. The internet and social media have also hit people's attention spans like a neutron bomb. There is evidence showing that the average time people look at an application on a computer screen is as low as 40 seconds, way down from 2 to 3 minutes in 2004. Smartphones, the internet, and social media have created a largely zombified populace, with hunched shoulders, heads buried in phones, and blunted sensory awareness of the world around them, sometimes leading to surprising deficits in basic skills like walking and getting out of the way in the absence of disability. The Bible takes months to read all the way through. To truly understand it demands a lot of patience and superhuman reading comprehension. Nonetheless, a certain amount of scriptural understanding is vital for salvation. If most people can't even watch a YouTube video for more than 40 seconds, what chance do they have of comprehending the Bible sufficiently to receive theosis from God? Make no mistake, the deceiver wants an ignorant, incurious, and distracted population. Evil and incompetence go hand in glove.